Hi everyone, I'm Effie Gale. This is going to be the first video in a series called Awful Writing Advice, where I talk about a whole bunch of common writing advice that I disagree with. Today's video is going to be all about the idea that writers have to write every day, and also that the quantity of words that you write matters more than the quality of them. I've wanted to do a series like this for several years, and I was reminded of it recently because a magazine that I've had work published in the past reached out to me over the last week or so and asked for an interview, which was really nice. And one of the questions that they asked me was, what advice do you have for new authors or maybe not so new authors? And I said a few different things, but one of the key things that I said was, I actually think the vast majority of writing advice out there is not very good, either because it's just plain bad advice, or because it can be good advice, but only applied to a certain subset of writers at certain specific times. And often this advice is treated like gospel and like it has to apply to everyone. And I just think that that is not true. So spoiler alert for pretty much this entire awful writing advice series, I'm going to be saying that this can be good advice for a certain group of people at a certain time, but it is not a rule. So if you're hanging around, I'm going to assume that you want me to go into it in a little bit more detail than that, which is why this series exists, but just setting your expectations from the beginning. So the first bit of awful writing advice that we're going to cover in this series is the idea that writers have to write every day. Otherwise, they're not a writer, or they're going to fail, or some other negative consequence that may or may not be directly stated when people talk about this piece of advice. And it's just blatantly not true. There are plenty of writers that don't write every day, they don't write every second day, they don't even write necessarily once a week or once a month, and they're still writers and they're still successful. They've still had things published, they've still won awards. I know that, certainly for me, I don't write every day, I don't even write once a week or once a month sometimes. And I'm still pretty proud of my publishing history. I've had plenty of pieces published in pretty reputable, nice magazines and anthologies, and I've won awards, and I think I'm in a pretty decent situation. But I really do not write every day, and it's been a very long time since I even attempted to do that because it doesn't work with my life. And I know for plenty of other people, it's not realistic either because of their work, or they're a carer, or their life just sucks or is set up in a way at the moment that means that they don't have the mental space or energy or other resources to be able to enable them to write on a daily basis or otherwise in a very regular way. And they have to carve out the time for their writing in other places, like maybe they only write on the weekend, or maybe they only write on holidays. And that doesn't strip them of being a writer or from potentially being able to have success. Would I love to be able to write every day? I would certainly love the opportunity to. For me personally, I still don't think that even if I had the complete opportunity and freedom to write every day, I don't think that I would, simply because my writing doesn't work like that. I would sooner or later reach a point where my brain wasn't ready to put the next part onto the paper. And if I tried to do that anyway, it would be bad. And I do my very best not to write anything in a story that I would consider to be less than at least pretty good writing, because that really sullies that story to me. Now, of course, as with a lot of these different pieces of advice, there is some truth to them, and I don't disagree with it entirely. I disagree with the you have to write every day part, but I don't disagree with the fact that this can be good for some people sometimes. And in particular, I think it can be very useful if you're writing a novel or something else that's very long, where you have to make sure that you're maintaining the same voice all the time, and that you're picking up exactly where you left off, and that there's this very clean flow throughout the whole piece. So in that way, I think that that can be very helpful. And, people talk about how writing every day kind of builds up writing as a muscle. And again, I really don't think that this is a requirement, but certainly the more that you write, the more that you're going to improve. as a general rule. So writing regularly and writing on a daily basis, if that works for you and you feel that that is helping you with your writing, by all means, do it. That can be really positive. But I also think that you can build your writing muscle in other ways. So for instance, even though I don't write all that regularly, I certainly don't write daily, I'm always thinking about my writing. I think about my writing every day. I'm thinking about what I'm writing at the moment plus my future pieces, which can definitely help me to be ready once I actually have the opportunity to write. But I'm also thinking about how can I make this piece or this next scene the best that it can be? How can I make it better? How can I become better as a writer? And one of the reasons that I feel so passionately about this piece of advice not being a requirement is that I see it so often and I really feel like it could put people off. If they're not really confident in themselves as a writer or they're writing yet, if they're constantly hearing that you have to write every day, otherwise this is not going to be viable for you, then they're really likely to just give up, think it's not for me. And those kind of people that are most likely to be affected are people who do have less time for writing or who are less privileged or more marginalized. And I want to make sure that they really feel like they can work on their writing and that they can share their writing with the world, even if they don't have the ability or the capacity in their lives to write every day. The second piece of awful writing advice that I want to discuss today is the idea that the quantity of words that you write is more important than the quality of those words. And I see this all the time as well in various different forms that writers are saying, I have to write 1,000 words every time I sit down to write, or I have to write 30,000 words this month, or I only feel like I'm making any progress if I write 500 words in this 30-minute writing sprint, for example. Now, if you're a professional writer that writes for a day job and you have a certain amount of words that you have to do by a certain time, or you're not going to put food on the table, for example, then absolutely work to those word counts. If you have a contract with a publisher that means that you have to write X amount of words by X date, then again, by all means, please work to that word count. I'm not saying that this is never a thing that writers have to do. Where I think that this can be bad advice is for people who don't already have this external constraint placed on them by an employer or a publisher that means that speed and word count is really important for them. For people who are more self-managed with their writing, this real emphasis on quantity of words and word count and achieving a certain word count in a certain amount of time, I think that can be detrimental. Some writers are the kind of writers where they have to kind of write into the story and discover the story and then come back and rewrite the story later to get that level of quality that they want. But not all writers are like this. For some writers, again, like me, writing badly really sabotages the story for me. If I can't get it to a pretty good level the first time, it's probably not going to be good for years. And that means that I can't generally write that quickly. I need to slow down and I need to write things well the first time, even if that is slower. So I really don't have an emphasis on speed when I write. I have a much higher emphasis on quality and getting out pretty good words and hopefully the right words the first time, because I know that for me, no words is better than bad words. All writers have different processes. I know, for example, if you told me and another writer to write a short story of, let's say, 4,000 words in 6 weeks, I would probably write every weekend over that time, and hopefully by the end of that 6 weeks I would have a finished draft of that 4,000 word story that would be 95% of the way there to how it would be when it was published. My work doesn't need a lot of revision most of the time. While for this other writer, maybe they wrote every day or most days and they put out a lot of words in each session, but they also needed to do 5 different rewrites or 5 different drafts by the time that they got to the end of the 6 weeks. And perhaps myself and this other writer, we would have gotten to around the same place. We would have gotten a mostly finished story of pretty good quality by the end of that 6 weeks. We've just arrived at it and in a different way. So like with all of these pieces of writing advice, if they work for you, great. I'm certainly not telling you to stop if that is a good process for you, but it is not a good process for everyone. It is not a good process for me. And again, I don't like this emphasis on quantity over quality as a piece of gospel for writers. So that is our first episode of Awful Writing Advice, where I talk about pieces of writing advice that I disagree with, at least in the context of applying to everyone. They're not all going to be about this kind of writing process. A lot of it is also going to be about the craft of writing and things like show don't tell, which I disagree with, and I'll probably talk about that next episode. Of course, all of this is just my opinion. You're very welcome to disagree with me. If you want to disagree with me or agree with me or have just a general further discussion in the comments, please do. If you enjoyed this video, leave it a like and subscribe to see more videos about awful writing advice and other writing and publishing related content that I put on my channel, usually about short fiction, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.